Senator Ed Markey, who is a national leader, congressional leader, who has served in Congress 45 years, 37 years in the House, the last 8 years in the Senate, serves on the Senate Commerce Committee. And if you were to walk into his office from the floor to the ceiling are the pieces of legislation that he has authored, sponsored, and worked together on a bipartisan basis. 5 years ago, we gathered at the Library of Congress to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the 1996 Act. Today is the 25th anniversary. Senator Markey, if you look at his record, he was a beginning, a founding, and a continual advocate for competition and for the consumer benefits that flow from competition, going back to the 1992 Cable Act, where satellite competitors were able to enter the market. A member company of INCOMPAS, Dish, benefits from that rich legacy. He authored the spectrum legislation that began the competitive wireless industry in 1993, and then was one of the lead authors of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which is our competition constitution. And so from the beginning days of competition policy, and then he and I were able to introduce the first legislation on net neutrality in 2007 and 2008. And so as he fights forward into the future today, he introduced with Anna Eshoo, a good friend, the National Broadband Plan for the Future Act. So he continues to lead the way to build on the foundation of what was laid in the 1996 Act, but to build for the future. His good staffer and friend, Colin Crowell, today in the Medium blog post, wrote about how do we modernize the E-rate program and celebrate it and its history and founding. It is always about the future, always going forward. And so today we are very pleased and proud to have Senator Ed Markey join the INCOMPAS Policy Summit as our opening keynote, as he lays out his vision for the future and as we celebrate the progress that we've been able to achieve together from the 1996 Act till today. Senator Markey, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Chip, so much. And thank you for all of your great work on making the 1996 Act a possibility, and for your friendship over all of these years, Chip. And thanks to INCOMPAS for having me on February 8th as we mark the 25th anniversary of the 1996 Telecommunications Act. And I have the signed bill right here with me, and like to hold this up. This is the actual picture of President Clinton signing it with the digital pen to basically take us from analog to digital, from narrowband to broadband, from dial-up to the future that we're enjoying today. And he signed it with a digital pen and about 8 ink pens. But what the president did was he gave me the digital pen. This is the pen that signed the 1996 Act into law. And here's a picture up here of a lot of my staffers, including Colin Crowell right here in the middle, Kevin Joseph, Larry Irving, David Moulton, my chief of staff, and Kristen Van Hook. But Al Gore and Bill Clinton immediately after signing the bill, as the president gives me this digital pen. And so this is that's the dawn of the era. And a small handful of homes had broadband on the day that we signed it. And our goal was to just create a revolution. And we were able to do it. And that day was actually the culmination of an incredible bipartisan collaborative effort. Tom Bliley, John Dingell, Jack Fields, Olympia Snow, Jay Rockefeller, Rick Boucher, Billy Tozan, Trent Lott, Chip Pickering, as well as Colin Kroll, Kevin Joseph, Larry Irving, Colin being my lead staffer on the drafting of this bill on the House side, Michael Regan, and so many other staffers who worked tirelessly on this landmark legislation. It's amazing to think that before Congress passed the bipartisan 96 Act, almost no one in America had high-speed internet access. And that was only 25 years ago. And so I'm proud of how the 96 Act changed all of that. I'm proud of how it triggered paranoia-inducing Darwinian competition in the marketplace, that it unleashed over $1.7 trillion of private sector investment. It created so much wealth in such a brief period of time that there are estimates that up to 30 to 40% of the tax revenues that led to a balanced budget in 2000 came from the 1996 Telecommunications Act. That's quite a moment in our history. But the bill also connected millions of children to the internet. It helped to catalyze a digital revolution that has transformed American life. And as we mark this anniversary, the variety of crises we face today demand that we use this occasion to look forward. We will create a promising digital future if and only if we put the principles of inclusion and equity and non-discrimination at the forefront, principles that we actually enshrined into the 96 Act. So how do we do that? Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us that we have to begin with connectivity. More specifically, we have to begin with connecting kids. As part of the 96 Act, I worked with Republicans and created the E-rate program to connect schools and libraries to the internet. And over the last 25 years, this law has had an exceptional record of accomplishment with more than $52 billion in federal funding committed nationwide. But remember, it unleashed another $50 billion of state and local funding as well. So it's $100 billion that has been spent on ensuring that there is connectivity for kids. And by the way, it skews disproportionately with an 80, 90% subsidy for poor children. It was built right into the law right from the very beginning so that we would have a deployment of an educational technology at the same rate for poor kids and wealthy kids. And that's what the bill accomplished. But today, we have gaps in connectivity who have no choice but to learn virtually from home. In our legislation, we actually made it possible for kids to have it on their desk, regardless of their income, but now they have to learn from home. And today, 12 million children lack the home internet access and devices they need to fully participate in virtual learning, and that is simply unacceptable. These students were already suffering from a homework gap prior to the pandemic, but now they're experiencing a huge learning gap that is quickly becoming an opportunity gap for these kids. If you missed the third grade, if you missed the fifth grade, because you don't have connectivity at home, there's going to be a long-term price that young person is going to have to pay in terms of their earning potential long-term. And that's why I previously introduced the Emergency Educational Connections Act. My legislation would appropriate at least $4 billion. And we want more, $5 billion, $6 billion, $7 billion to be delivered through the E-rate program to equip students with internet connectivity and devices. And that's why I led a letter last Thursday to acting chairwoman Rosenworcel with 36 of my colleagues urging the FCC's new leadership to free up existing E-rate funds for distance learning to make a down payment on connecting K to 12 students without home internet. And in the days ahead, I will continue to work tirelessly to urge the FCC to act and for Congress to include funds for distance learning in the next COVID relief package, because children comprise 20% of our population, but they represent 100% of our future. And as we expand access to the internet, we also have to ensure that the online ecosystem remains free and open. And net neutrality is just another way of saying non-discrimination. Chip and I introduced the bill 12, 13 years ago, 14 years ago. And it has to be at the top of our agenda. I've been saying that ever since I introduced the bill with Chip. And right now, entrepreneurs are in crisis. The little guys, online and offline, are struggling to get by. We need net neutrality so that small businesses aren't shoved into online slow lanes. We need net neutrality so that internet service providers aren't able to throttle access to certain websites in order to benefit their bottom line. We need net neutrality so that powerful social media companies can't step on their competition by cutting deals with big broadband providers. The 96 Act gave birth to a whole new vocabulary with a distinctively American accent. Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, later Etsy and TripAdvisor and Lyft, and tens of thousands of online companies. That was the goal of the act. It was to unleash all of this competition, and it was to do so in a non-discriminatory environment so that we could give birth to this new generation of online companies. And now we have to make sure that our vocabulary continues to grow. But the reality is that net neutrality is also a civil rights issue, from Black Lives Matter to the Me Too movement, from high school students demanding gun control to teachers calling for fair pay. Today, individuals of all walks of life are carrying the torch of American activism. They're doing it in the streets, but they're also doing it online. And without net neutrality, Americans may be slowed down or stopped when they attempt to speak their minds on social media, live stream incidents of police violence, or organized peaceful protests. We can't allow that to happen as our country strives to root out systemic racism and other injustices. And while we fight to ensure that the internet is free and open, we also have to promote competition in the online ecosystem. And I've long opposed harmful consolidation in the telecommunications industry. And I will continue to oppose mergers that threaten to raise prices and stifle competition, and as a result, stifle real innovation. When we passed the 96 Act, I said that we would unleash a new revolution of massive changes that are unimaginable, but will be the product of competition. We've made great strides towards that goal, yet that work remains unfinished because the technology industry is increasingly dominated by a powerful handful of companies. And finally, we need to face head-on the civil rights violations that are taking place online. We must address issues around discriminatory data uses and biased algorithms that are harming vulnerable populations in our country. And that means enacting a comprehensive federal privacy law that includes data use limitations. You know, I always said that there's a Dickensian quality to the internet. It's the best of technologies and it's the worst of technologies simultaneously. It can enable, it can ennoble, it can degrade, it can debase. It's a choice that we have to make. as as Americans, and we have a responsibility to animate technologies with our values. And that was the approach that we crafted in the 96 Act, and that must be our approach moving forward. I believe today the 96 Act was the future then. The 96 Act is the future now, and the 96 Act will be the future tomorrow. We have to work together to ensure that those basic founding constitutional provisions in the 96 Act are protected. They can be modified in order to adjust for what we've learned over the years. But ultimately, the core principles of that law are still serving our country well. So I thank you, Chip. I thank you for the great invitation to be with you here today, and look forward to our conversation.
Well, Ed, as you laid out, both capturing the history of the 96 Act and how it continues to be and is the future that shapes so much of our economy, our education, now our healthcare. And so I'm thinking, you joined Congress right after Watergate. We had a period of time where our country was deeply divided, protest, failure of leadership. And as we come into this Congress, a new Congress, 50-50 Senate, nearly divided House, a new president. As you look at the Commerce Committee and your role there, how can you bring people together as you did in the 96 Act and in other legislation to really kind of lay a course that will hopefully restore trust in our institutions and rebuild the spirit of unity that we really need in our country right now? And so let me start there. How do we kind of restore and rebuild and renew the American spirit, sense of unity and purpose and common ground?
No, that's a great question, Chip. And when I look back at all those laws that we did in the 1990s, the Cable Act of 92 created the 18-inch satellite dish. It created the kind of the foundation for competition, but President Bush vetoed the bill. And to override a veto, you have to partner with Senator Jack Danforth of Missouri. You have to partner with Republicans, including Matty Rinaldo, on the Energy and Commerce Committee to override that veto, which we did. In 1993, it was Mike Oxley with whom I was partnering to move over the 200 megahertz to create the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh wireless companies in our country. And in 1996, as we said, Tom Bliley, Trent Lott, Jack Fields, just bipartisan. And I've always believed that essentially telecommunications policy is bipartisan, should be bipartisan. You have to work hard to make it ideological. You really do. You have to work very hard. And even the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act of 1998, I did that with Billy Tozan when he was the Republican chairman of the subcommittee. So in each instance, bipartisanship was the hallmark. That's what it was all about. And I hope, that as we move forward, we'll be able to do it. So as recently as just a year ago, I worked with John Thune on the Senate Commerce Committee in order to pass the robo call legislation to put strict limitations on robocalling in our country. And by the way, thank you all for you're welcome for all of the all of the reduction in the calls. And we have more work to do. We realize that, but John Thune and I agreed that there were no red robocalls or blue robocalls, just robocalls that people hated. And so that's a perfect example of how, in a contemporary way, that we work together. It's Democrats and Republicans to pass that law. So, so that's how I'm looking at this new era that is opening up, and my hope is that we'll be able to really move forward in a way that reflects the ultimate need for bipartisanship.
Well, I was a conservative member from Mississippi, and you are a Democrat from Massachusetts. And who would have thought that the two of us would have been the partners on so many initiatives in telecommunications and the 96 Act. But it was the common ground around competition. That competition is the best way to regulate markets, to unleash free market forces of investment and innovation, and the consumer benefits the greatest. And so that American value of competition united us, and I believe it continues to unite both sides of the aisle in the current Congress. And so we'll continue to advocate from INCOMPAS and work with you and others to do so. So let me.
By the way, Chip, there were a lot of Democrats that really liked those pre-existing monopolies, and there were a lot of Republicans that really liked those pre-existing monopolies, and then there were Republicans that hated monopolies and Democrats that hated monopolies. Well, that's the way it should be. You know, we should then out of that we came to, this whole era here where it wasn't about deregulation. It was about demonopolization. That was what the principle was, right? And people kind of forget that, right? That they just use the word deregulate apart from what is the goal ultimately. And there it was to make sure that these monopolies had Darwinian paranoia inducing competition for the first time in their histories.
Well, that's a great way to lead to the next question. Today, you introduced on the 25th anniversary of the 96 Act with Anna Eshoo, our good friend, the National Broadband Plan for the Future. And as you look at the possibility of an infrastructure bill coming in the first 100 days of this administration in Congress, and as we look at the lessons of COVID and the need for everyone in America to be connected, doesn't matter if rural, urban, low income, of any background, it seems like there's a new consensus in the country and a new commitment to bring connectivity, broadband connectivity, the universal principle of broadband connectivity to every American. So talk about those two things. One, how do we do that? And then two, do we have a chance in this Congress and the infrastructure bill to see major progress for significant funding to achieve that mission?
I think we do. I think there's a real recognition that there is a broadband gap in our country. 42 million Americans right now do not have access to reliable broadband. And we know that disproportionately those families are Black, they're brown, they're low income, they're rural.
Yeah.
They're rural as well. They're red state citizens without real access on an ongoing basis to reliable broadband. So I think our goal has to be to ensure that we are providing the resources so that there is real access to broadband in our country. Jim Clyburn, as we know, the father of former FCC Commissioner Mignon Clyburn, has introduced a bold bill, $100 billion for broadband deployment in our country. I support that wholeheartedly. I think that when we look at an infrastructure bill, as it's moving through the United States Congress this year, that there has to be a big broadband component to it, big. And the Commerce Committee is obviously the place where telecommunications laws are made, and that's where the expertise is to ensure that we do make this focus on an investment in broadband. And I will be pushing very vigorously for us to be able to accomplish that goal. It's kind of the final stages here of this broadband plan, that we initiated back, in 1996, February 8th of 1996, and we can see where the gaps are, and we have to close them. That's our objective, and I'm going to work very hard to make sure that any infrastructure bill has the funding to make sure kids get it at home, so that they are able to continue their educations, and also that there be a broader plan, a broader broadband plan. I've introduced legislation to put together an updated national broadband plan that will fit the needs of this next generation that is arriving.
Any prediction as to whether the infrastructure bill will pass and broadband be included?
I would say it's like trying to predict whether or not Tom Brady's going to win the Super Bowl. I would say yes. There will be an infrastructure bill, and it will be a big infrastructure bill, and broadband will be included, and that will be one of the provisions that I think we can make bipartisan, because it affects red and blue states all across our country, and I'm very hopeful that will be the ultimate outcome. Matter of fact, I'm very confident it will be.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I know that it might have been hard for all of the New England Patriots to watch Tom Brady win a Super Bowl in a different uniform this year.
Well, we kind of feel in general that 9 Super Bowls and 6 titles, maybe he deserves us to be cheering for him in his greatest of all time bid to put any other question of who's the greatest quarterback to rest. He's still our guy, and an Irish Catholic guy from, is somebody that Massachusetts can rally behind. So it's a little bit of a mixed emotion, but ultimately we were definitely 100% with him.
Well, so as we go from Super Bowl.
By the way, people might not know that Chip was a defensive back for Mississippi College. Okay, so he was a great college athlete, which a lot of people might not realize.
Well, I'm afraid I could not have guarded anyone as Tom Brady picked our secondary apart. But from Super Bowl to Super Connected, let's talk about E-rate. Your former staffer, our good friend Colin Crowell, wrote a piece in Medium today, looking at the history of E-rate, but really calling for how do we modernize the E-rate program going forward. You've been working with Acting Chairwoman Jessica Rosenwortzel on how to not only have connectivity at school, but how do you have connectivity at home? How do you have the devices? Tell me your outlook on the E-rate program and ways that we can improve it, build upon the success, and really bring it into the needs post-COVID.
Well, I have believed that the Trump Federal Communications Commission was not using all of its authority to make sure that the revenues that it had under its control were being used to make sure that kids during this crisis get the help which they need at home. So I'm obviously urging the FCC to act and for them to do so rapidly under Chairwoman Rosenworcel's leadership, but also that we include dramatic new funding in the COVID relief package that we're dealing with right now to make sure that distance learning is in that relief package, and ultimately I think that in the infrastructure bill, we need $100 billion. That's the Clyburn proposal, which I support wholeheartedly. I had introduced legislation with Joe Manchin, actually, and Debbie Stabenow looking for, I think it was $50 billion just a couple of years ago But again, the number just, it has to be matched in order to meet the magnitude of the problem. So I'm very hopeful that we can come together on this issue. Obviously, the E-rate was bipartisan long ago. We have to keep it that way. We have to keep the funding levels high, and I encourage the FCC to use its discretionary authority to use its existing funds.
Throughout your career, you have been a leader not only on telecommunications and broadband and tech, but on energy and the environment. As we look at, from our region, the increasing intensity and number of hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, out west of wildfires, what we're seeing with the different climate issues, environmental issues, where does broadband come into that? And to have redundant, resilient, secure networks, as well as what are the environmental benefits of connecting every American to the internet and to broadband capability. Give me your thoughts on those subjects.
Well, I've always focused on technology issues in my career in Washington. I love technology issues, and the same thing that is true for telecommunications is true for energy and environment issues. So there's just so many of the problems are created by technology, but so many of the solutions are technologically based as well. So here we have a couple of issues that are now coming together. The climate crisis as oceans continue to warm, as the storms continue to intensify, as tides continue to rise. Scientists have actually projected that sea level rise will submerge over 4,000 miles of fiber optic cables within the next 15 years. In addition, extreme weather events raise the likelihood of severe outages in our communications networks. And unbelievably, if you take the entire aviation industry and all of its emissions, its global emissions, the information and communications industry produces as many emissions as do the aviation industry. So we have to be focusing on these issues. And that's why Senator Ron Wyden and I are drafting legislation that will strengthen our networks against climate change while simultaneously reducing the carbon footprint of the communications infrastructure.
Well, I now want to kind of shift to a question where you and I have worked, and you made mention in your remarks earlier. Is it time to have a permanent solution to net neutrality? Is it possible in this Congress that instead of going back and forth every administration in changing the regulatory framework on net neutrality, and that's kind of been the pattern over the last 10 to 15 years, can we reach a consensus in Congress to have a permanent net neutrality solution? INCOMPAS has worked with members on both sides of the aisle, trying to strike that balance of ensuring the same protections of the 2015 order, but looking at whether a new title might be the way to go. What are your thoughts on that subject?
Well, I obviously want Congress to bring finality to the net neutrality issue. The ultimate lasting solution, though, has to be the right solution to protect online innovation and activism and maintain the internet as we know it. And in order to preserve the free and open personality of the internet, we need strong, enforceable net neutrality rules and clear FCC authority over broadband access. In the short run, whether it's by enacting my Save the Internet Act or by action at the FCC, we need to just quickly give authority over broadband back to the commission and reinstate strong prohibitions on blocking, throttling, paid prioritization. And we need to just reverse the wrong-headed decisions of the Trump Federal Communications Commission. And that's what I am going to be working to advance.
And, as we get to a close of our conversation, there are a number of major issues as it relates to my member companies that are the leading technology and internet companies. How can we address trust and transparency and privacy? So as you look at algorithmic, how do you look at accountability to the algorithms? How do you look at major legislation you had mentioned with Senator Thune on privacy? As we try to restore not only the civic and civil society and the institutional trust, but also from our private sector, how do we have trust and security that allows us to maintain the best of American technology while we protect those levels of trust and protection?
Okay, well, we live in a world where there has been a monetization of people's privacy, where we know that we've seen algorithms that have been developed which actually result in harmful content and damaging and biased algorithms being used. And we know that anti-competitive practices are still abounding out there in the marketplace. And I think it's time for us just to step back and to begin to put in place kind of the guardrails that protect against the kind of the abuse, the misuse of the power which the internet has put into the hands of certain private sector individuals, so that the power ultimately is still in the hands of the individuals who use the internet. And so that would be my goal in privacy, Children's Privacy Bill of Rights, especially an updated version of it. But facial recognition, anti-competitive practices, all of them put on the table for examination so that we can move forward to provide real protections for the American people.
Well, Ed, we have a few questions. I'm trying to see if I can pull them up and see. The first question is, can you detail your call for federal legislation to push for data use limitations?
Here's where I am right now, and it's not that I don't want to continue this, but I think I have to. I think I'm on MSNBC right at 1 o'clock on the impeachment, and it's not that I don't want to continue, because I'd love to continue. I'd love to come back with the whole group if that's possible. But I think that Katie Tour expects me to get on here and to do an interview on this impeachment proceeding, and I should just do a little bit of prep for that as well. And I apologize to you, Chip.
Well, let me just end this this great conversation and just the great celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Telecom Act and the work that went into that, really starting almost 30 years ago, and then culminating in the 1996 Act and your leadership in it and everything since then, where you've worked to maintain competition across all platforms and technologies. And I just want to thank you as both for your friendship, your leadership for the country, and I look forward to working with you and your colleagues as we go forward.
And by the way, I would like to just note that before the 1996 Act, there was a 1994 Act, which we had passed in the House of Representatives almost unanimously on a bipartisan basis, Jack Fields and I, and it actually included the E-rate. The E-rate was in the 1994 law that passed the House, and it was killed in the Senate in a filibuster. Unfortunately, but then we came back in 1996 and we did it all over again. And so I look back at those wonderful days of bipartisanship, and my hope is that we can once again see kind of a rebirth of what really was the intent of the founding fathers, that we come together and we work across party lines as Americans to accomplish big goals in this sector and many others. So I thank you, Chip. Much appreciated. But just, and all of you watching, please stay close. Love to talk to you as we're going down the line this year.
Well, thank you, Ed. And I believe that's a great place to end, on the bipartisan rebuilding of the American spirit and can do, and starting with broadband. So thank you very much.
Thank you.